Back in 1994, there was a 23-year-old woman named Christene who had a little 3-year-old boy named Nick. Christene was a very outgoing, bubbly, ambitious woman. She worked 2 jobs just to put herself through college. Once she graduated, she got a job as a paralegal, but the job took her 600 miles away to Southern California. Before leaving on a long trip with her young son, she told her parents that she would call them in a couple of days to let them know she had arrived safely. 3 days had passed, and the parents got a phone call from a friend of Christene's. She said Christene had never arrived and asked where she was. They began to worry and started to call all the hospitals and the police department. The police weren't very interested in taking their case seriously because it had only been 48 hours, and they get around 200 calls like that a week. They said she'll probably show up and not to worry. After she had been missing for 3 days, Christene's family went everywhere to hang up flyers asking people to call if they've seen them. Later that night, Christene's aunt, who is over 600 miles away, calls frantically explaining that she had had a horrible dream. It was dark, there were some lights, and she could see Nick, Christene's little boy, and the number 16 kept popping up over and over. She's had premonitions before, and the dream was so vivid that she knew it could not just be a dream. She insisted on making a trip out there to help search for Christene and Nick, and she felt that she would find them. After they had been missing for 4 days, the sheriff's department finally made her case a priority. The deputy that wound up working the case, Rich Strasser, was on the graveyard patrol shift at the El Dorado County Sheriff's Department at the time. He went around to question every gas station in the area in hopes of finding someone that could recognize her. Luckily, one man did. He said he had just seen her and Nick a few days prior at the gas station. He even remembered her car. She had made small talk with him, and he remembered her mentioning she's tired and dreading having to drive up the mountain with windy roads to go see a friend. Immediately upon hearing this, Deputy Strasser was highly concerned, going over the many possibilities of what could have happened to her. Now on day 5 of the search, things start to get very strange. A woman named Deborah Hoyt was visiting family in the Sacramento area when she suddenly woke up in the middle of the night around 2 a.m., feeling intensely that she needed to go home right away. She woke her husband up and told him what was going on and that she felt like there was something pulling her up the mountain, that they had to leave right now, in the middle of the night at 2 a.m., and she hates driving up the mountain when it's dark out, but they did it anyway. As Deborah and her husband were on Highway 50, she was looking out the window, and while they were on Bullion Bend, on the side of the road, she sees this blackish white thing. As they approach, she sees that it's a very pale white woman laying completely naked on the side of the road, as if purposely positioned to draw attention. Her brain immediately rationalized this as possibly seeing a dead woman, but they decided to keep driving and report it once they got to a phone, just in case it could be some sort of trap where people might jump out and take their car or something. They were able to find a phone about a quarter mile up the road, and the police told them to get in the truck, lock the door, and wait for an officer to show up. Once the cops show up, they show them where the woman was, and they found nothing. Deborah knows with absolute certainty that she saw that woman on the side of the road, and the cops later said that she was very convincing, very sincere about what she had seen. After they had gotten home, Deborah tried to sleep, but the image of this woman kept popping into her head and she couldn't stop crying. Later on, back at the police station, Christene's aunt and uncle show up from Southern California. After hearing about this sighting of a naked woman on the side of the road, they immediately wanted to go up to Bullion Bend in the dead of night to check it out. But the deputy recommended they get some rest because they've been driving all day and were very tired, and it was very late, very dark, and it could have been dangerous for them as well. Eventually, the cops put 2 and 2 together and suspected the sighting on Bullion Bend could be related to Christene. So the deputy heads up there on his own to check it out as the sun was rising. As he's driving through the bend, he's searching for anything out of the ordinary that could be a clue. When suddenly, on the side of the road, he sees a small child's shoe. He pulls over and explores the area nearby. And sure enough, at the bottom of this steep hill, beyond the trees, was Christine's car, completely smashed up. He quickly makes his way down to see if anyone was there, and he finds Christine's dead body sitting in the car, and next to her was her little 3-year-old boy, Nick, who also appeared to be dead. He had the look of death. He had no pulse. He had no pupil reaction to light being shined in his eyes. Deputy Strasser assumed Nick was dead. And as Strasser stood there, he sees Nicky's chest raise a little bit, like he was breathing. At first, he thought he was seeing things, but found Nicky had a very shallow breath, but was clearly near death. The deputy immediately called for an ambulance and held Nicky's hand, trying to get him to interact with him and stay awake. Nicky survived for 5 days with no food, no water, while holding on to his deceased mother. He was only 3 years old, and the doctors who examined him afterwards believed that he would have had only an hour or 2 left to live had he not been rescued that morning. Him surviving was a miracle, and the fully naked woman that Deborah Hoyt had seen on the side of the road could not have possibly been Christine. The coroner's report explained that she had died on impact. She had been dead for 5 days at that point, with all of her clothing still on. And during an interview 17 years later, Nick described the memories he had of the crash. He remembered the initial crash hitting tree after tree while speeding down the steep hill. He remembers waking up and seeing his mother next to him, thinking she was just asleep. Then he saw a giant light standing next to her. He said that the light had stayed the entire time. He also saw another giant light through the back of the car standing up near the road. And this one had a silhouette of a body. He also felt safe while looking at them. The memory is so vivid that he can picture it perfectly to this day. He believes they had been angels trying to save him, or possibly his mother's spirit. Okay, so that was the original story that's been told time and time again, largely sourced from the 2 shows Paranormal Witness and Unsolved Mysteries, but that wasn't the entire story, and they got a bunch of details wrong, and there's just so much more to it. I thought it was strange that everyone from the story had appeared on the show to explain their point of view, everyone except for Christine's aunt, the one with the dreams, which led me to find an interview from 2014 by author and theologist Chris Putnam with that aunt, Karen Nichols. He also interviewed Nick Skubish, the 3-year-old boy that had survived. He was in his early 20s at the time, and after reading it, it should definitely lay to rest any doubts about something supernatural occurring that day. The following is from Putnam's article that I'll link below. According to her, the report isn't very accurate. On the program, Karen calls Dave and recounts a strange dream that included Christine and Nick, as well as the number 16 repeated over and over. Karen told me that the TV version is mostly fiction because the number 16 was not part of her dream. And in the program's version of the story, the number 16 was on that road. Somehow, the details of her dream got mixed up with other details, and the show presented a falsehood. It is not clear whether the inaccuracy was intentional. Perhaps this was because Karen refused to participate in either Unsolved Mysteries or Paranormal Witness, even though both programs offered her money. Why did Karen decline the monetary offer? She said she is a born-again Christian who felt it was wrong to sensationalize the tragedy. She wrote to me, "I declined their offer because I didn't see how this could in any way glorify the church. I didn't feel it in my spirit." She had several extrasensory dreams, and this is the first time they have ever been accurately described to the public. We will now set the record straight. Despite the errors, however, Haunted Highway did report at least a few details about Karen's dreams that were correct. For example, on the show, they said that she had premonitions before, but this was so real, she knew that she was going to find him. This is absolutely true. Karen has written in detail about her lifelong experience with premonitions, visions, and precognitive dreams. In fact, she once warned a relative concerning cancer weeks before it was diagnosed and accurately predicted a close family member's demise. This is Karen's account of the first dream she had on the night of the accident. Monday morning about 3 a.m., June 6, 1994. I had a dream of riding in the back seat of a car at night. I could see the silhouette of a child in the passenger seat and a girl driving. I could see the reflection of the headlights and the hood of the car. I could tell we were on a dark road because there were no streetlights, and outside it seemed to be mountainous. That morning, I spoke to my mother and my sister and asked if they had heard from Chrissy. They said no, but I knew she was going to stop by a friend's house in Carson City, Nevada. So even though I felt a bit uneasy, I continued to push it out of my mind and told myself everything was okay. That night when I went to sleep, I had the same dream, exactly as the night before, and I repeated the same activities as the day before, calling to check on Christine, with the same disappointing result. It was now Tuesday, June 7th, and my concern grew stronger, and I felt very anxious. My heart felt heavy, and I had a sick feeling in my stomach. I knew that something was very wrong. With no word from Christine on Tuesday, Karen was distraught. Karen's third dream is much more disturbing. Keep in mind that Karen calls Christine her sister because they were so close, but technically, she is Christine's aunt. This was Karen's third dream. That night, I had another dream that was different than the other two. This dream was more of a catastrophic nature. I was in my sister's house, and there was a horrible wind. This wind had so much force that the trees were completely bent in half. I was standing in front of the window and looking out into the yard. It was a big yard, as my sister lived on 16 acres with many tall pine trees. It was nighttime, and all of a sudden, the winds increased to hurricane-like. I could hear the sound of glass breaking and popping and metal scraping. I could see sparks. I looked over in the yard, and I could see Nicky standing in the middle of the yard. I also saw my sister trying to get to him. There was so much debris blowing around, and glass shattering, and metal that looked like it was curled up. I was trying to help my sister, but I couldn't find my shoes. I was barefooted, and I knew I wouldn't be able to make it to her because of all the glass that was on the ground. I finally found them, and when I opened the door, the wind stopped. I ran to her, and she was just standing there with Nicky. Nervously, I was laughing, and I turned her towards me and asked if she was all right. When I looked into her eyes, they were blank, and there was no life in them. Her face was inexpressive. She looked like she was in a trance, because she didn't look at me, but through me. I asked if she was okay, and she said, no. I said, are you going to be okay? She looked at me with very haunting eyes and with a melancholy expression, and again said, no. This dream seems to meet the definition of what experts call an after-death communication, or ADC. Because Christine is telling Karen that she, Christine, is deceased, but that Nick needs help. This was early on Wednesday morning, June 8th, 1994, and nobody had any evidence about a car accident. However, Karen was now absolutely sure that something was amiss. At this point, I woke up to hear a loud screaming sound and a pounding like a loud bang. I sat up, my heart was racing. I could hear the sound of my heart beating. It was hard to breathe. It felt like someone hit me hard in the pit of my stomach. It felt like all the blood had rushed to my head. It was brutal. It was the kind of dream that shakes you to the very core, and it wasn't going to go away. There was no shaking this dream. This was probably about the same time of night as the other two dreams I had previously. Now this is Wednesday, June 8th. I couldn't go back to sleep. I got ready for work and still my gut hurt. My heart felt heavy. My chest felt tight. My head felt swollen. I felt completely out of sorts. When I got to work, it was really hard to concentrate on my work. I told my coworker about the dream and how I couldn't shake it. I kept having chills that ran down my back. I made it through the day, but I felt really tired. When I got home, my daughter asked, "Mom, did you hear that Chrissy is missing?" I said, "No, I hadn't heard," but I flippantly said, "Chris isn't missing. How can you miss Chris? She was too loud to miss." As I said that, I took a couple of steps and dropped dead in my tracks. I knew that this was it. Chrissy was supposed to arrive today, and I still hadn't heard from her. The dream occurred the morning on Wednesday, June 8th, and it was that evening when Deputy Strasser got the missing persons report. Thursday came and went with no new developments. Karen was convinced that her entire immediate family should be scouring the roadside, but she had no car. She asked her husband to rent one. I was trying to convince my family that if she had been in a wreck, there was a good possibility that Nikki could have survived. I could feel him. I could feel that he was alive. I didn't feel Chrissy, but I did feel Nick. But still, no one would help. My sister did make flyers and hand them out and post them with a picture of Chris. Increasingly concerned, the family printed up flyers and began distributing the flyers along Highway 50. Karen, who lived 500 miles away, was finally able to rent a car in order to start searching the roadside with her husband. Karen described the search. On Friday, June 10th, I knew the window of opportunity was closing for Nikki. I was desperate. And by the time we picked up the car, it was around 8 to 9 p.m. We had about a 7-hour drive ahead of us. As we left on our journey, I was praying and continued to pray all the way. We were probably about 2 hours into our drive, and I just couldn't find the words to pray. Then there was a groaning in my spirit, and I began to hear an utterance that I couldn't understand. I believe it was the Holy Spirit. I began to hear a man's voice. It was dynamic and forceful, and he was praying. He was demanding and he was rebuking. Even though it was strange, I understood every word. He was covering Chrissy and Nikki with the blood of Jesus. He was sending God's angels to surround them. It sounded like heaven was being called down with all the glory and love and protection. I do not believe I ever experienced such power before. I felt like I was surrounded in peace and warmth. I heard this for what seemed the entire trip. But then, at one point, I couldn't feel Nikki any longer. I told my husband he could slow down. It was over. Nikki was gone. I could no longer feel him. Karen believes that Nick actually died at this time, and there is some startling confirmation of that from Nick himself after his rescue. Once they got there up at Bullion Bend, Karen described, "I knew that there would be something of Chrissy's or Nikki's on the road, or at a turnout that would let me know where they were, so I began looking on the side of the road. If I didn't have a clear view, I would have my husband stop so I could get out and physically look over the side. There was so much vegetation on Highway 50, a very mountainous highway that leads to Lake Tahoe. The timing of the discovery is amazing because it seems that Karen and Deputy Strasser arrived at the scene within minutes of each other. As we were looking, I saw a little tennis shoe lying on the side of the road and also noticed that the patrol car had stopped there. I told my husband, 'She's here, stop the car.' I got out of the car and started to run, but the deputy stopped me and told me that I couldn't go down there. By down there, I mean there was a drop-off about 20 feet down and I could see Chrissy's car. I was yelling Chrissy's name. The deputy said that Chrissy was gone. I remember it felt like my legs turned to rubber, and I and my husband hit the ground. Nikki was alive, but barely. He looked like a little bird that had fallen out of a nest. His skin was dark and baggy. His little eyes were filled with muck. His lips were parched. He was marked and curled up in a fetal position next to Chris. When his name was called, he responded quietly. I left to go to Marshall Medical Center in Placerville to wait for the ambulance to bring Nikki there. When I was finally able to see Nikki, he was alert but weak. I knew something miraculous had taken place, but at that time I wasn't sure what it was. Later that morning, when they were able to stabilize him, they transferred him to UC Davis. His organs were shutting down. They said he only had 30 minutes, maybe less, of life left because his kidneys were shutting down and they still weren't sure if they would be able to reverse the damage. So we left Marshall Hospital and went to UC Davis in Sacramento. When I walked in the hospital room, Nikki sat straight up and looked at me, his little eyes big as saucers, and said, "My mommy died." I said, "Yes, Nikki, she did." Then he said, "I died too, but I wasn't afraid because I was with Jesus and his angels. But I couldn't stay. I had to come back here." He also said that Jesus' angels were there with him in the car. I asked where they were, and he said, "There were 3. There was 2 by the car and 1 on the road." I didn't say anything. I couldn't speak. I just held him and thought back to the time when I couldn't feel him anymore. I thought to myself, he is only 3.5 years old. How would he know these things? He wasn't old enough to be influenced by anyone. This corroboration from Nick suggests that when Karen could no longer feel Nick's life force, he actually had a near-death experience. And there are even more details that were never reported. After Nick's rescue, a California highway patrolman, Jack Greenwood, gave Karen astonishing information not reported on any of the television programs. He even told her that something supernatural took place. She recalled the conversation between her and her husband and Greenwood shortly after Nick's rescue. We met with Jack, and when we first met, his eyes were big and he spoke very precisely. He began with a deep breath and started by saying, "I'm not a religious man. I'm not a Christian man." Then he said, "I am Catholic, but I'm not religious. I have to tell you something that happened here that I can't explain." He was on duty the night before Christine was found, and there had not been 1, but actually 3 calls. The first call was about a woman lying on the side of the road. They reported she was naked, had dark brown hair, was petite with big breasts, and her skin looked real white, like she had been in the cold for a long time. He went out to the area to investigate and found nothing. Later that night, he received another report of a woman lying on the side of the road with the same description in the same area. Again, he went to investigate and found nothing. Later that morning, he received another call with the same report of a naked woman of the same description. He said he told the caller that he had been out twice and there was nothing there. The man replied, "The hell there isn't." He told Jack that he was sitting on the side of the road with his cell phone watching her from his rear view mirror and that she was running frantically back and forth like she was looking for something. He said, "I'm watching her as we speak." Again, Greenwood found nothing. Greenwood reported that 3 different people had reported seeing a naked woman by the side of the road. He went on to say that he had been a highway patrolman for over 28 years and had seen a lot of accidents where people had been in the elements for days. He said that when the body deteriorates, the abdomen will usually swell and burst, and that is what he expected to find. The days all that week had been very hot, about 106 degrees in the daytime. He was the officer who went to the site of the accident. It was a wilderness area. He said the insects were awful. They were being bitten by mosquitoes and other bugs. There were lots of varmints and wild animals in that area. But the strange thing was that when they got to the car, it was as though a tent or a veil had been placed over the car. He said there wasn't 1 insect bite, no blowfly larva, no animal bites, no sign of anything. Nikki's clothes had been folded and placed on the hood of the car. Greenwood then said that he was the one that took Christine out of the car, and her stomach was just as flat. as if she had just died. There was no sign of deterioration or decay. She only had a little trickle of blood from her nose. Greenwood said that she had probably died at impact. It was obvious that she had broken her neck from the protrusion of the cervical spine. He said that there was only one tiny spot on her elbow that showed any sign of deterioration. He said that when he took her out and looked at her, she fit the total description of the girl that had been reported. He said, "I don't know what happened, but something supernatural took place here." Next, Chris interviewed Nick Skubish, the 3-year-old child that had survived the crash. During this interview, he was in his early 20s. Chris starts by asking, "Nick, do you actually remember the accident?" Nick responds, "I remember almost every night. I don't remember the days too much, but I remember the night we wrecked. I remember the car flipping. I remember hitting tree after tree after tree. And I remember when the roof of the car got ripped off. I remember seeing my mom. I remember getting out of the car. I remember climbing up that 40-foot embankment and sliding down on pine needles. I remember seeing lights. I remember every night pretty much. I just don't remember the days at all. If anything, I feel like I was sleeping, but I don't remember the days at all." "Did you have any water or anything?" "Not that I remember. I know we wrecked at 2 o'clock in the morning, June 6th, and they found us sometime in the afternoon on June 11th. So, a little over 5 days and 6 nights, counting the night of the accident. That's a long time to go without food and water." "Yeah, I had a severe concussion, matter of fact. I still have a scar. I'd say a good 3 inches long on the side of my head. More of an indentation, really. And I went through severe malnutrition and severe dehydration." "Do you believe you saw angels at the scene of the accident?" "Yes, only at night." "Can you describe them for me?" "Sure. Take the silhouette of a person, just the form, if you will, and make that form an essence of light. Just light radiating from the form, but no physical features, no hands, no clothes, just light." Nick remembers climbing up to the road, but after no cars came, not knowing what to do, he returned to the car and his mom. Chris continues, "You remember making it to the road?" Nick responds, "Yes, I definitely got up to the road a couple of times." "Is it possible the naked body people saw was you?" "I don't know. Honestly, I don't ever remember laying up there, but anything is possible. I just remember what I remember, and other people saw what they saw." "Do you think the naked apparition seen at the road might have been your mother?" "I would say, yeah. I think if my mom were playing a part in what happened, she might have to go about things in different ways with different people to get them to perceive what was actually going on. Maybe their mind would have told them it wasn't real, but a woman lying on the side of the road was a real possibility. Therefore, Deborah Hoyt saw it when she did." Ghost or no ghost, a naked woman lying on the side of the highway is hard to ignore. Nick believes his mom was doing what was necessary to get a reaction. His great-aunt Karen also believes that the apparition was her niece's post-mortem effort to save her son. She offered, "Some say that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, but if there was any possible way to make this happen, I know Chrissy could. She had such a great love for the Father and Jesus, and she was so strong-willed and determined that nothing would stop her from making sure her baby was safe. She loved him so much. He was all she had in this world. He was her everything, and there were no boundaries where he was concerned. Her love remained even in death, even if it meant taking her clothes off to attract someone to the side of the wreck." I continued to ask Nick for more details about the angels that were with him that night. Perhaps they had something to do with apparition sightings. Interestingly, this led Nick back to Karen's dreams. "These beings of light that you saw, were they close to you? Were they only at a distance? Did you interact with them?" "One of them was next to the car the whole time, and one of them was next to the road. I've been told by a lot of people that when I was in the hospital, and like I said earlier, I don't remember the hospital. I don't remember the recovery at all. I was told by a lot of people that I told them I saw the angels. I told them a lot of other things too. I told my Aunt Karen a few things. I don't know what show you saw, but one that goes way back, Unsolved Mysteries, talks about my aunt having visions. That's the same aunt. She had multiple dreams, I guess. at the time it was going on. She has actually had quite a few paranormal experiences. A lot of people in my family have had paranormal experiences, on that side of the family at least. An important idea developed in the Supernatural Worldview, which is a book he wrote, is that some folks, like Karen Nichols, are more inclined to perceive the spirit realm than others. This doesn't make them guilty of witchcraft or of practicing the occult arts. It isn't something Karen asked for or intentionally developed, but rather is an inherited ability. I've also heard a lot of stories over the years of other paranormal events involving a mother's bond with their child, or just two people that are very close to each other having some sort of connection where one or both of them can feel or see what's going on with the other person. I've had experiences with a connection like that in the past, and there was one time with my mother that was mind-blowing, which I should probably save for another video. Anyway, what do you think about this story? Do you think it's pretty airtight, or are you still skeptical? Personally, I definitely believe God was with that child and saved his life. I think that there were angels there that day. He was not meant to die that day, and what happened was a miracle.